Get the Angel Reese special at McDonald's now. Let's break it down. My favorite barbecue sauce, American cheese, crispy bacon, pickles, onions, and a sesame seed bun, of course. And don't forget the fries and a drink. Sound good? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating restaurants for a limited time.
Your data is like gold to hackers, and they'll sell it to the highest bidder. Are you protected? McAfee helps shield you, blocking suspicious texts, malicious emails, and fraudulent websites. McAfee Secure VPN lets you browse safely, and its AI-powered text scam detector spots threats instantly. You'll also get up to $2 million of award-winning antivirus and identity theft protection, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
Hey everyone, it's Mary, and I've got a small favor to ask. We're working on an upcoming episode about how regular folks are feeling the impact of government cuts in their own lives, and we want to hear from you. So, do you have neighbors who are suddenly out of work, things you can no longer do or say because funding of one kind or another is drying up? Let us know. The way to do it is to give us a ring. Our number is 646-582-0091. That is 646-582-0091. All right, on with the show. It was summer when Rachel Snyder started showing up in women's prisons all across California with a survey and some snacks. There are a couple of these institutions. The biggest is known as the Central California Women's Facility.
It's out in Central California. It's surrounded by almond groves and desert. It's hot, hot, hot. I mean, like Iraq hot, right? Middle East hot. In fact, in July of 2024, a woman collapsed in the yard during one of the big heat waves that summer and died.
You were there to talk to murderers, right?
I was there to talk to, women who had been, or women identifying inmates who had been convicted of manslaughter, murder. So there's, a lot of charges within that, but they were all in for homicide.
Rachel is a journalist, but she teamed up with Stanford University to do some research.
The big question that we were trying to get at was, did domestic violence intersect with their conviction? So in other words, had they not been a victim of domestic violence, would that crime have happened?
To figure this out, Rachel was asking some incredibly personal questions about who these incarcerated women had been partnered up with before prison and how that person treated them. Were they choked? Beaten? Was he jealous or unemployed?
Are there stepchildren in the home that are not biologically the abusers? Does he have access to a gun? Or does he own a gun? Access is just as important as owning a gun.
You heard about how one woman just broke down when she was taking the survey.
Yeah, she had to stop. We actually encouraged her to stop. This woman was older and had killed her husband. And this was a case where he developed, I don't know if it was full-blown Alzheimer's or something, but he got really violent. And so she had killed him and she had been sentenced. And she just could not stop crying.
More than 600 women agreed to take this survey. And about 20% of the women accused of homicide killed their abusive partners. But a majority of the women Rachel spoke with, no matter who they killed, they were being abused.
Because there's a lot of ways that domestic violence coerces women into committing crimes. So, for example, they might be forced to clean up a crime scene. They might be forced to drive a getaway car. They might be under threat from an abuser who says, "Get here now or I'm going to kill the kids." And they're driving home and they hit a pedestrian and kill a pedestrian. That happened a number of times, actually.
You went into your research with this hypothesis that some huge proportion of women behind bars for homicide were there because they killed their partners, their abusive partners. And I know you found something slightly different than that. But I wonder at the end of the day, what your takeaway was from the research.
What I would say is that our self-defense laws in this country, which were primarily written for white men, by white men, with the imagined scenarios of white men, are discriminatory. And they need to change.
Today on the show, the truth about why women kill and who's got a right to self-defense anyway. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
Get the Angel Reese special at McDonald's now. Let's break it down. My favorite barbecue sauce, American cheese, crispy bacon, pickles, onions, and a sesame seed bun, of course. And don't forget the fries and a drink. Sound good? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating restaurants for a limited time. Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place for changes big and small. Loud or quiet, find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Like Rachel Snyder said before, the connection between domestic violence and a homicide conviction is complex, nuanced. But it's clearest in those 20% of cases in which a woman kills her abusive partner. So I asked Rachel to tell me a story she'd gleaned from her research. The story of one woman whose mitigating circumstances seemed to Rachel to prove her point, that self-defense laws are not written with women in mind. The woman she thought of is named Anita Ford, who is in prison because of her involvement in the death of her husband, Barry.
She married him 3 weeks after her 18th birthday. And this was back in the 80s. And she was pregnant with their first kid when they got married. So she gave birth about 5 months later.
We spoke with Anita, too. She's still incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility. You'll hear her voice throughout the show.
At the beginning of our marriage and our life together, you couldn't have asked for a better husband, a better friend, a better partner. Anything I wanted, I got. He bought me diamonds at every single holiday, not anniversary, holiday. Even if it was just a little diamond chip. But he made me feel very secure in our relationship.
And Barry started to get abusive a couple of years into their marriage.
How so? What did he do?
You know, at first it was just verbal. And the first time he was ever violent was absolutely shocking to her. They had had takeout and, they'd brought the takeout home or whatever and ate on plates and forks, and then she just stacked it on the dishwasher and shut the dishwasher. And he apparently didn't like her to leave dirty dishes ever.
And when he noticed it, we got into an argument over it. And he's like, why can't you just do it the way I told you to do it? Why can't you just do the dishwasher? Just run it. That's all I want you to do is run it. And when I started to rebel against it, he started hitting me on my right shoulder. And it was like a good 6 or 7 punches. And that was when the first time I went, wow, this is something I ain't never done before.
He also had a couple of accidents. He had a really terrible burn from a fire when he was working on a car at one point. He also had, I think it was a motorcycle accident. So he started to take more and more pain pills, and she said that the abuse got a lot worse after that. And she said he strangled her a couple of times. She blacked out a couple times. He dragged her through dog feces in the hallway by the hair.
And they had kids, right?
They had kids. The kids were little, 2 kids, Teresa and Bobby, they called him. Robert is his name. And I interviewed both of them.
They remember the abuse?
Yeah, I mean, Robert doesn't remember anything. He said he doesn't even remember the layout of the house.
That's interesting.
But Teresa can draw the layout of the house. And what's interesting about that, and Robert actually did say this to me in the interview. He said, I really think that my brain has had a trauma response.
I think a lot of people would look at a situation like the one that Anita found herself in and just wonder, like, why didn't she leave? You know, why didn't she take the kids and go far away? Did that ever happen?
That's a really common question. And I think part of what I take issue with that question is we presume that it is the man's home to stay in and not the woman's home equally.
Like, why doesn't he leave?
Right. Why doesn't he leave? He's clearly unhappy. But the fact is, she, like most domestic violence victims, did leave. The first time she left, she went to her best friend's house, and he knew.
I was gone for 2 weeks, and I called him up on the telephone, and he's like, babe, I'm sorry. I know that I hurt you. I'll do whatever you want to do. Just please come home. I love you. It'll never happen again. And if you love someone, you're going to believe them.
He went there. He convinced her to come home. He said, I promise I'll go to therapy. I'll go to couples counseling. He went once. He told the therapist, she's the one with the problem. Fix her. And he refused to ever go back again.
Did she ever involve the cops, like get an order of protection or anything?
Well, so they didn't have those in those days. There was no such thing as an order of protection. And she did call the cops a couple of times, and they came and said, yeah, this is a domestic. You guys got to sort it out.
I called the cops, I think 3 times. And all 3 times I got this, Miss Ford, we're sorry because we didn't witness the abuse, so we can't arrest him for it. Really? That's what it takes? You have to be able to see it before you can arrest someone on it? You can see the bruises.
The second time she left, she was smarter. She had been taking money out of their shared bank account in small amounts to try to save it up, which, by the way, the prosecutor said she stole money from her husband. Mm-hmm. Right? Again, not an uncommon framing even today. She went and rented an apartment secretly. She got a new job. And while Barry was at work one day, she took the kids and went to this new apartment. She suspects, by the way, that he called her old job to say, hey, a paycheck has come for her and I need to know where to send it. She thinks that's how he found her.
Smart.
Followed her home, followed her to the babysitter's, and then went to the babysitter's house while Anita was at work and said, Anita's called me and said, I need to pick up the kids. She wants to talk. She wants to reconcile, and I'm supposed to take them. And the babysitter didn't know. She was brand new. She didn't know, and so he took the kids.
So I wait for him to get home, and I call him up on the telephone, and I said, I want the kids back. And he says, if you're not home in 30 minutes, I'm killing them both. I hung up the phone. I jumped in the car. I was driving on the emergency lanes with my flashers on to get home in time because I believed him.
What a nightmare.
What a nightmare.
In the end, how did Anita end up killing her husband?
Well, she's not the one who killed him. She ended up telling her older brother, George, about the abuse. George wanted to buy Anita a gun, and she was like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't have a gun in the house. I wouldn't be able to do that. So George took it upon himself one night to get 2 other mutual friends of theirs, and called Barry with a fake car problem. And Barry went out to help them, and George shot him and killed him immediately. And the police found Barry's body, and they were arrested in very short order.
Like, it was obvious what had happened.
It was obvious. It was pretty obvious what had happened. And Anita had said, she had conversations with them like, I just wish Barry would die. I just want him dead. Because she had tried to leave him, and he had shown her that he would never allow her to leave. And so, the prosecutor said, oh, she planned this with her brother and these other two men, but she was the mastermind behind all of it. She created the whole plan when really it was this sort of haphazard, George is like, I'm going to fight for my sister's safety and the safety of my nephew and niece. And George was convicted of life without parole, and he died in prison a couple of years ago. And Anita was also convicted of life without parole, even though she hadn't even been there.
The one thing that I've always said every day in here, if someone asked me, would you change what you did? No, I wouldn't. The only thing I would change now is I'd pick up a gun and shoot him myself, because that would have given me less time. But I look at it this way. I will do every day of my life sentence with a smile on my face, because I know my children are safe. If I had to give up mine to make theirs okay, I'm cool with it.
Here's something I struggle with, just looking at the cold facts of Anita's case, that some might feel uncomfortable with, is that when Barry was killed, he wasn't an imminent threat. He wasn't physically attacking her at the time. What do you say to people with concerns like that?
Well, imminence is one of the probably the biggest reason why self-defense laws don't work for victims of abuse, but in particular women.
Why?
Well, women are generally smaller than men. They generally have less strength than men. So, and they are attacked in their homes.
So if they're being attacked, they'll be overwhelmed quickly.
They'll be overwhelmed quickly. When you think about imminence, what the law says is, yes, someone has to be attacking you in that split second. But that split second is really quicker than a second. For example, here's a common scenario. There's a fight in a kitchen, and a woman grabs a knife, right? The guy's coming toward her, and she grabs a knife. Gets him in the aorta. Say it's just an unlucky stab. A court will very often look at that and say she didn't have imminence, because in the 1.5 seconds it took her to grab a knife, she could have run out the door. She could have run out the hallway. So when I say the law looks at it as quicker than a second, that's the scenario I mean, right? There are a lot of women in prison today who have that exact scenario. So that's one problem with imminence, is that imminence is quicker than right now.
Well, and imminence is in the eye of the beholder, it sounds like.
Imminence is also in the eye of the beholder. So one of the things that has no place in the law is, why is somebody using violence in the first place? Are they using violence to save someone else, as I would argue Anita was doing?
To save her children.
To save her children. Or are they using violence to control someone else, as I would argue Barry was doing with Anita and the kids? That is never has any place in the law, right? And I think that's a critical piece of it to understand. The other thing about the law is that it is incident-driven. It is not narrative-driven.
So you're just looking at this 10 minutes versus the last 5 years.
Exactly. The law also assumes people who are strangers, but this is not the case in a domestic violence situation.
You know, in your writing about this, there's this one quote that stood out to me from a researcher who was talking about the problem of imminence and how it has to be the right time for self-defense to take place. She wrote that under the law, women are not entitled to fight back with a weapon until a man is actually beating her severely enough to make it clear he's going to beat her to death or nearly so. And by that time, of course, she would have been rendered helpless to resist. It reminded me a lot of the language around abortion bans, how you can't get an abortion until you're dying. I wonder if that stood out to you too.
Oh, absolutely. That comes from Cynthia Gillespie, who wrote an incredible book called Justifiable Homicide. And that quote comes from the late 80s. That quote is so old and yet still so true today, that a woman has to calculate how close she is to death, and not be so close that she miscalculates or misjudges and is rendered helpless, right? But close enough to get help. It's absolutely true. And if anybody listening doesn't think that there is a direct correlation between women like Anita Ford that we imprison for the murders of their husbands and women who are banned in all of these states from having abortion, then you're not seeing the link between the law and control over women's bodies.
When we come back, should the U.S. change self-defense laws to encompass scenarios like Anita's?
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by PDS Debt. Struggling with credit cards, personal loans, medical bills, or collections? It's time to stop worrying about that high-interest debt you've got piling up. PDS Debt can help you start saving money immediately. Their platform can analyze your unique situation and create a plan to get you out of debt. There's no minimum credit score required, and it takes 30 seconds to get your results. With PDS Debt, you'll take back control of your finances. Get a free debt analysis in just 30 seconds at pdsdebt.com/Spotify.
I'm ready for my life to change.
ABC Sunday, American Idol returns.
Give it your all, good luck, come out with the golden ticket.
Let's hear it.
This is a man's world.
I've never seen anything like it.
And a new chapter begins.
We're going to Hollywood!
Carrie Underwood joins Lionel Richie, Luke Bryan, and Ryan Seacrest on American Idol. Season premiere Sunday, 8/7 Central on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Rachel's research into the connections between domestic violence and homicide led her to some bigger questions about the way American law conceives of self-defense. The story American self-defense law is set up to deal with, Rachel says, usually goes like this. One man gets attacked by another man. Most often, he doesn't know his assailant. They're in a bar, they're on a sidewalk, or in someone's home. And he's got a right to fight back and protect himself. But Rachel says that the law doesn't make room for a story where the person with a right to self-defense is attacked repeatedly with increasing severity by another person with an equal right to be in their shared home. The U.S. is not the only country with this problem, of course. In Canada, feminists spent years looking into cases like Anita Ford's and offering recommendations to lawmakers. Eventually, the government took action.
It wasn't until 2013 that the government actually finally reformed its self-defense laws. And the easiest way to explain those reforms was that there's a much broader definition of hearsay and of evidence, and also of what one researcher called socialization. So, for example, there was a case of a Native American woman, a Native woman in Canada, who had killed her abuser. And the judge, I think this was the judge who brought in this information, which was super interesting to me, who said, we have some demographic data around the murdered and disappearance of Native women, which, of course, happens in much higher percentages than, among the white Caucasian Canadians. And so it can speak to the level of fear that the defendant is under, and thus the reasonableness of her actions.
So in Canada, would someone like Anita Ford still be guilty, still be in prison?
Well, you can never say for sure, right? Because it depends on the jurisdiction she's under. But Canada's only had that change in their law for a decade. And of course, they don't have the access to guns that we have here. So they just don't have the numbers there that we're looking at. So, there hasn't been a full study, I think, that can say definitively, but there was a researcher who looked at about a dozen cases and found that, about 75% of them were acquitted ultimately when they went to trial.
One professor you quoted in your article in the New York Times, she said women who kill their abusers shouldn't be charged in the first place. And hearing that, I sort of wonder if you played out in your mind where a recommendation like that might lead. Like, I hear something like that, and I worry a little bit about unintended consequences. I worry about how a blanket absolution could serve as an incentive for people taking the law into their own hands.
Well, I think you're not alone in that worry, and judges have used that reasoning for hundreds of years, actually, right? And the term, I've seen this in multiple court cases, it'll be a free-for-all, right? And you can look, for example, at the passage of the Violence Against Women Act in the 90s, and there's a direct correlation between jurisdictions that have spent more money to create more resources for domestic violence victims and the numbers of homicides of men in those areas, which have gone down. So in some ways, I remember I had a researcher say to me, actually it was Jacqueline Campbell who created the danger assessment. She said, I was listening to a presentation and I was so shocked by this that I actually went up to her afterwards to double check that I'd heard her correctly. And she said, in many ways, the Violence Against Women Act has benefited men more than women because women don't have to kill their way out of domestic violence situations.
I think a casual listener might hear us and think that part of what's being said is these men deserved this. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that the law fails women long before women do these things. No, I am not an advocate for justifiable murder, but I am saying that these murders were justified in the current legal context that we have because it does such a poor job of protecting women.
Our justice system and our culture reflect each other. And I know that you're thinking a lot about how the justice system can do better with women who are victims of domestic violence. But I read your article and I just kept thinking about the broader cultural change that needed to happen, which is harder and more incremental. Do you think about that too?
Every single day I think about that because it does feel like, and I don't think it's just that I'm attuned to these issues. It feels like there's just a massive backlash happening. I mean, I have been following with despair in my gut the case of the woman in France whose husband, drugged her and then invited men to come rape her over the course of 10 years. I look at the loss of bodily autonomy for women in this country. I have a daughter who's a teenager. I have told her, you're not going to college in a state where abortion is not allowed. I just won't pay for it, right? Huge cultural change needs to be made. On the other hand, I think if it wasn't working, there wouldn't be as big of a backlash. Maybe I'm trying to find a positive spin, I'm trying to look for the happy spin, but there is a movement politically with women, and particularly young women. There is, I think, a growing awareness of a society that encourages the full participation of all people is a society that is healthier mentally, that is economically more stable and more prosperous, right? That creates happier families. I mean, all you have to do is look at the Nordic countries to see that.
I want to end by going back to Anita because her story is so affecting. And, I know you had a chance to talk to her children. And I think that's important because a lot of domestic violence victims, there aren't a ton of eyewitnesses to what was happening in the home. But of course, children are. How do they process their mom's time in prison?
It's really interesting because Teresa, her daughter, is in her 40s now. And Teresa is very clear about not just that she believes her mother saved their lives, but that she also believes her mother didn't mirror what an abusive relationship looks like, so that abuse was never normalized for her. I see her as sacrificing herself for her children. And that's how Teresa sees her too. Robert, it's more complicated because he has no memories of it. But he did say to me, you know, I've heard so many stories about my father over the years, and I feel in myself sometimes his rage and his anger, or what I think was his rage and anger, and it scares me. And he has made a determination to never get married and have kids.
Wow.
And he said to me, it's like really heartbreaking actually, but he said I don't know my father. I have no memories of him. I don't even know what he looked like other than from pictures. I don't know how he moved, how he sounded, what his voice was like. But I think I'm pretty well adjusted, and I think I'm pretty healthy. And, you know, Teresa, his sister, has children, and he's an uncle to her children, and he's like, that's where my family is.
Rachel, thank you so much for your research. Thanks for coming on the show and chewing it over with me. I'm grateful.
Thank you for having me.
Rachel Louise Snyder is the author of No Visible Bruises. What we don't know about domestic violence can kill us. She's also a professor at American University. We also spoke with Anita Ford. Anita's been incarcerated for more than 4 decades for her part in Barry Ford's murder. She's worked as a mechanic, a cook, a porter, and she's mentored other women who fought back against their own abusers and landed behind bars. Some have made it out, and they keep in touch. She says they call her Mom Anita.
My dad used to say, you can't allow a situation or a person to change who you are, because that's giving up on you. So I refuse to allow this situation to change me and my heart. I'm not going to allow it. I was a good person then. I'm a good person now. And that's all that matters to me.
Anita's also applied to California Governor Gavin Newsom and asked to have her sentence commuted. And that's the show. If you're a fan of what we're doing at What Next, the best way to support us is to join our membership program. It's known as Slate Plus. You can go to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Madeline Ducharme, and Ethan Oberman. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. You can go track me down on Blue Sky. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you back here next time.
Get the Angel Reese special at McDonald's now. Let's break it down. My favorite barbecue sauce, American cheese, crispy bacon, pickles, onions, and a sesame seed bun, of course. And don't forget the fries and a drink. Sound good? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating restaurants for a limited time.